Hello and welcome to another BlenderBranch.com tutorial. I'm Kenan Prophet and this is a nature scene tutorial. So we're going to be creating this photorealistic nature scene from scratch. So we're going to start by modeling some plants and then we're going to go over some composition tips to frame your image in a realistic manner, and then we're going to go over some post-processing to really make that image shine. So we have a lot to do. Let's jump right into it. I'm going to go to top view. I'm going to load in a background image, which is going to be a leaf texture that you can download from cgtextures.com. And we're actually going to download a couple of textures from there. We're going to download this leaf texture you see here, and also this bark texture right here. And I'll have the links for these in the description of this video. So go ahead and open the leaf texture in your background image, add image, and wherever you have that saved, it's this image right here. And if we go to orthographic mode, we can see we're going to be using this top leaf right here. And we're just going to model a simple model off of this image, and then we're going to project that image onto our model. So I'm going to go Shift A, add in a plane, tab into edit mode, and just start moving these vertices around. I'll press E to extrude, and then just S to scale, and nothing too complicated here, just simple modeling, making sure that this is pretty close to our image that we're working with. That's a nice thing about nature. If you're not big into modeling, modeling really tends to be kind of the easy part. Lighting and composition really is what is going to sell your nature render as realistic. So we're not going to spend too much time on the modeling part, as you can see. Now the reason you want to make sure we have geometry and not just slap this image onto a plane, because this is on an alpha channel, is because you want to make sure you have geometry that you're working with, because we're going to model an entire plant from this single one leaf. Alright, so I'm not going to finish this whole stem here. I'm just going to kind of extrude out a little like that and call it good. Okay, I'm going to add a couple loop cuts in the middle here. And now we'll just, in object mode, press Ctrl A, apply the scale, tab into edit mode, and press U to unwrap. So now this is unwrapped, and we can go ahead and add that image to it. So I'm going to go new material, call this green, and we're going to add image texture, and you can just select this drop down image, and we have the leaves there. Should already be there because we loaded it in our background image. So I'm going to split this window, change it to the UV image editor, tab into edit mode, and just bring up that image right here in the bottom. And now all we have to do is get these UVs into place. So just grab S, scale along the X and Y axis to sort of get it to fit that image. I guess UV unwrapping job wasn't perfect, but you know, for our purposes it was good enough. So now I'm just going to scale this around, move these bottom vertices into place. You just want to make sure that every part of the mesh has, green inside of it. That's the main thing. So you don't want any gaps, otherwise it's going to look slightly funny on your mesh. I just like the whole thing and scale it in. There we go. That's pretty good. Pretty happy with that. Not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. So now what we want to do, just hit assign, and if we go Shift Z, there we see in previewed mode that image has been slapped onto that mesh. Pretty great. All right, so let's get rid of this background image. I'm just going to uncheck that. And now what we want to do is sort of clean up this mesh a little. So now that the image has been mapped on, I want to sort of straighten this out. So I'm just going to grab these vertices, sort of rotate them around, make sure this stem is sort of just a little straighter. Went a little too far there, just because I'm a little bit OCD. Alright, now that's good. Now what we want to do is apply the transformation of the object to be at the very bottom of the leaf. So I'm going to grab these vertices here, press Shift S, cursor to selected, and now inside object mode I'm going to go Object, Transform Origin to 3D Cursor. So now what that does, if we rotate around, you can see it rotates based off of the very bottom of the leaf there. And this is important because what we can do is use this to sort of scale and manipulate our object to create an actual plant. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide this camera for now. I'm going to grab our leaf, and I want to make sure that I have those bottom layer of vertices selected. I'll go to front view, and we want to enable proportional editing and make sure it's set to smooth. And I'm going to press R to rotate, and we can increase or decrease this circle of influence by scrolling the middle mouse wheel. And if we just rotate up, you can see that sort of has something that starts looking like a leaf of a plant, which is great. And I might want to sort of decrease that circle of influence and kind of rotate this, maybe grab it out. That way it sort of goes straight for a little bit and then curves out. So we have sort of a base of our plant right there. Okay, now I'm going to grab this leaf and select everything, press S and Y, and sort of thicken that plant. Now we can do this and our image texture will still stay perfectly intact. It'll be stretched, but it's not very noticeable because just the nature of what we're doing. Normally you wouldn't want to stretch objects that have an image texture like that, but in our case we can get away with it. Okay, so now that we have that mapped on pretty nicely, what I want to do is go ahead and duplicate this leaf to start creating a plant. So I'm going to go Shift D and rotate around. Before I do that, I'm going to get rid of that. Make sure our transformation is still set at the bottom. So I'm going to select this bottom layer of vertices, go Shift S, cursor to selected, and then Object, Transform Origin to 3D Cursor. There. Now the origin's set back at the bottom where we want it. So now we can go Shift D and rotate around. There we go. Now I'm going to go Shift D again, rotate around one more time. And we might get some sort of intersection going on there, so we want to kind of bring this out, this particular leaf. This is what's great about proportional editing. You can really do a lot within proportional editing to sort of make your plant look realistic and get rid of the intersection that's going on. So just made that leaf have some variation there, and yeah, you want to make sure that the starting point is all really similar. So now it's just a matter of sort of making sure each leaf is different. So what I'm going to do, grab this leaf again, Shift D, and duplicate around like so. Now I sort of skipped a step here, and that is that we want all those leaves to sort of curve upwards on the edges. So I'm going to go through each leaf, and I'll select by right-clicking and holding down Option and Shift, select those edge loops here, and proportional editing is still enabled, so I'll just press G to grab and grab those up like so. And we can kind of do the reverse in the center. And that's very realistic to an actual plant. They sort of slope up on the sides. So I'm going to go through each of these and repeat the process, and just making sure that there's some variation, maybe with one edge is higher than the other on some of them, and yeah, that'll just help your plant look more realistic. Another thing you want to do is for some of these tips here, you want to kind of rotate them and kind of scoop them out so that the plant sort of scoops up. There you go. That'll add some realistic little flair there. So I'm going to make sure we it's just all about adding these small details. And look at reference images. I have a plant sitting right here on my desk that I've been looking at, sort of the inspiration for this tutorial. So that'll really help. Study plants, how light passes through them, the shape of the leaves, and just how really each leaf on a plant like this is just going to be very different from the next one. So there's not really anything, there's not a uniform pattern you can predict each leaf is going to be. So there we go. That's some pretty good variation. Now what we want to do, again, make sure that you don't have any of this intersection going on, at least not where it's too noticeable. Now, you want to make sure that each leaf has sort of some crinkling going on. So I'm going to select each of these leaves, select everything, press W and subdivide, and I'm going to turn fractal up to 0.5 just to get some nice subtle crinkling going on in there. And I'll do the same for all of these, only changing the amount of fractals. So I'll go 0.2 for this one, W subdivide, 0.7 for that one, and just, again, a small little way to make sure each leaf is different, 0.6 for that one. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and hit smooth shading on all of these, so we have a smooth plant to work with. So now what we have going on is just 4 leaves of this plant. And basically what we're going to do is just keep duplicating these leaves, scaling them at different shapes and sizes, and rotating them around to add thickness and more geometry and just kind of create a natural looking plant. So I'm going to work on mine, and you work on yours, and then we'll come back and sort of go from there. Alright, so here's my final plant. You can see I've added some longer, thinner leaves coming out of the center here and sort of draping over everything. And yeah, I've added sort of some twisting and more crinkling just to get a nice plant with good variation going on here. So what we want to do is join all of these leaves together to get a solid object. So I'm going to go B, box select everything, and press Control and J. And then once I've done that, I want to sort of select a point near the bottom here, about right there, and go Shift S, cursor to selected, and just object, transform, origin to 3D cursor. So now the origin of this plant is there at the bottom. So that'll make it easy for scaling and rotating, and also putting this plant into a particle system, which is what we're going to do later on. Okay, so now that we have all of that into place, I'm going to bring back our camera. And we want to add in a sunlight to sort of tweak this plant material so that we can see what we're doing. So I'm going to go lamp, sun, rotate this around, and just have it facing the plant like so. And I'll bring it back at an angle here to the side. And I'm going to give this a strength value of 4 and a size of 0.6. And basically I'm going to duplicate this sun and bring it to the other side to create some nice backlighting. I'm going to bring this around, and we want it down at a lower angle so it has kind of sharper shadows like so. And we'll give this a small size value of 0.06 and a strength of 3. So now let's we don't have to look at through the camera. Let's just see what this looks like with those lighting. There we go, we have our plant, and it's looking pretty good with just the image texture, but you can see it's pretty boring. It's just that image texture and nothing else really going on. So let's go ahead and select that material, and I'm going to go to the node editor, fill our timeline with that, and we want to really tweak this material. So what I'm going to do, you can see we just have the image texture plugged straight into a diffuse, and we need some translucency going on with these leaves. So I'm going to go Shift A, add in a translucent shader, put it underneath the diffuse, and then add in an add shader, plug in the translucent to the add, and the color from the image texture into the color of the translucent. So now what that does is now lets light through, but it keeps the color of our original texture. Now I'm going to add in a glossy shader, Or I'm sorry, we need a mix shader first. Mix shader and glossy. And we just need something to determine which parts of this are glossy. So we're going to use a layer weight node, input layer weight, take the facing value, plug it into the fact of that mix shader, and we'll take the blend all the way down to 0.1. So now this plant has some glossiness, and it's determined by where the light is hitting the plant in proportion to the camera. So that's what that layer weight does. And now we want to add in some displacement. So I'm just going to take the color output of the image texture and plug it straight into the displacement. Normally you would want to create sort of a displacement map for this, but because this is really small detail, we can get away with just using the actual image texture. Now I'm going to add in a math node because currently there's far too much displacement. Set it to multiply, and we'll go a value of 0.3, I think will be good. So you can see already our plant is looking a lot more realistic. We have some bumping going on and some glossiness reflecting that light, and that's looking just fine and dandy. So what I'm going to do is go out of rendered mode, and let's give ourselves some more space here. I want to apply the scale of this plant, so Control A, rotation and scale. And now basically what we're going to do is duplicate this plant to create another plant with some more variation. So I'm going to go Shift D, duplicate, and I'll just hide everything but the plant. So with the plant selected, go ahead and press Shift H. And now we're going to work on creating some variation. So basically what I'm going to do is with proportional editing enabled, just kind of tweak a few things here. So I'm just going to grab some random vertices, sort of scale up the whole thing. And this is kind of really quick and dirty, messy work. If you want to create a whole nother plant, you can do that just by the same method we did, just adding more variation, but you certainly don't have to. And to add a leaf, it's really simple. Even though this is all one object, we can still duplicate individual leaves by selecting one point and pressing L. That selects all of that shared vertex group. So what I can do is just press Shift D and disable proportional editing and rotate that individual leaf around. So now I have another leaf there that I can sort of manipulate, and this will add more variation to our plant as long as there's some difference going on there. Okay, I might do that again, create another plant or another leaf sort of coming out the middle here. So I'm going to go L, Shift D, disable proportional editing, rotate that around. I want this to sort of have a different overall shape to it. I might isolate this leaf, so I'm going to go P, separate by selection. That way I can sort of play with it. I want a leaf coming out of sort of the dead center of this plant, pretty tall like that. And we'll just rotate it around. Just making some tall sort of variation. We'll have this plant be a taller plant. And it's important, like normally you can really go crazy with how many plants and variations you have. The more really the better, the more realistic your scene's going to look, because in real life there's so much variation to nature. But for the sake of time and the length of this tutorial, I'm just kind of creating two separate plants that we're going to put in a particle system to create some variation. So there we go. That's going to be pretty different from our first plant. Now what I want to do is duplicate the material. So I'm going to go plus and then grab that same green material and hit plus on it. So now it's green 0.001, and we'll just rename that to brown. And I'll select everything and hit assign. So now it's the assigned brown material. And we'll want to go into the node editor, and we have this brown material selected. So I just want to pull back this image texture, and before the diffuse, basically what we're going to do is drop in a hue saturation node. So now I'll go Shift Z, and we can bring back our lights by pressing Alt H. and we'll see the variation we have here. If I take the hue down to about, that was kind of a cool color, 0.3, and then take the saturation down to 0.8, we get a nice variation going on here with the colors. So this one kind of looks like it's turning colors or dying a little bit, and that'll just add a lot more variation to our entire scene. And what we can also do is things like turn up the roughness. So this might have a roughness of 0.3. That way it's just a little bit less glossy than the first one. And you can even turn the blend value down if you would like. And I might also increase the displacement ever so slightly, 0.4. That way there are just some distinction between these two plants. Okay, so that's great. Let's go out of rendered mode. I'm going to apply the scale and rotation of this plant. And now what we want to do is I'll go ahead and apply the transformation. So I'm going to select the bottom vertice, Shift S, cursor to selected, object transform, origin to 3D cursor, and that'll help us with when we put it into a particle system. Alright, so now we have our two plants, and this is basically, the hard part's basically finished. What we want to do now is create a tree to sort of help out with our composition. So I'm going to hide everything, press H to hide, Shift S, cursor to center. I'm going to add in a cylinder, and we'll scale this along the Z-axis 4 times, and I'm just going to move that up like so we can see what we're doing. And now I'm going to create a whole bunch of loop cuts, Control R, and spin the middle mouse wheel until the faces look square. You can just eyeball it. I don't know an exact number, but you can see right there that's pretty good. Good enough for our purposes. And now I'm going to go ahead and delete the top and bottom faces, just to make things easier on us for unwrapping. And what we want to do now is start to sort of create a tree-like shape. So I have proportional editing enabled. I'm going to go ahead and select this bottom layer of vertices and scale out, create a trunk shape. You can do the same with the top, scale in, make sure there's variation going on. And before we get into sculpting, we can sort of kind of use proportional editing to just create a variation, just so it doesn't look like we're just working with a straight cylinder. Just kind of grab out some parts, indent a little, and that's pretty good. Alright, now I'm going to use sculpting, so let's apply the scale, Control A, scale. We'll need to add some more geometry, so I'm going to go W, subdivide, and I have fractal on, I'm going to go 0.4 for the fractal, and turn the number of cuts up to 2. There, now we have some more geometry in our mesh, and what I'll do is go to sculpting mode, and I'm going to use the blob brush, and put a radius of 40, and a strength will go 0.6. And now this is a great brush. We're just going to sort of blob out some roots here. Symmetry is enabled, so I'm going to uncheck symmetry and blob out. And in sculpting, if you don't use it very often, any brush you do, if you hold down Control, it does the opposite. So that helps us to sort of blob in, create some nice detail, and with our mesh. Basically, I just want to make it look like we have some roots going on around the bottom. We're going to put an image texture of bark on here, and this tree will most likely be out of focus unless you sort of frame your scene to have it be a big part of your scene. But for my purposes, it'll be mostly out of focus, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time adding detail or really anything with this tree. It's mostly just something to sort of help with composition and add a little bit of that nature detail that we want. So you just can add however much sculpting detail you want. Maybe there's kind of an indent there, owl hole maybe. And you could use the tree add-on for this, I suppose. I wanted to sort of sculpt and add a big tree trunk, and I didn't need the branches in my scene. So I get a little frustrated with the tree add-on. It's not my favorite add-on, to be honest. So that's why I like to sort of just make my tree from scratch. Alright. You want to make sure there's some root-like shapes going on here. Some twisting. And that's pretty good. Don't need a whole lot of detail. Alright, that'll be good. Now I'm going to go back to object mode and just hit smooth shading. And now we're going to add in an image texture to create this tree. So I'm going to just go U and unwrap using cylinder projection. And we're going to add new material. Let's call this tree. And add in image. You want to add in that image texture that you've downloaded from cgtextures.com. And it's this bark texture right here, pine bark. And if we just see, we can check our UVs by splitting the UV image editor. And yeah, it's pretty good. There will be some distortion going on. If you go Shift Z, you can see it mapped really pretty well. Even though we did some sculpting, the image will be distorted a little bit. But again, the tree is not a huge part of our scene, so it'll be an amount that I'm okay with. The distortion. All right. So let's go ahead and bring everything back so we can see what this looks like with our light. And I'm going to sort of move this tree over to the side. And we'll start tweaking the material of this. So currently you can see the image texture is far too big for this tree, so we need to increase the scale of it. So to do that, I'm going to go Input, Texture Coordinate node, drop that in. And I'm also going to drop in a mapping node. Take the UV output of the texture coordinate in, the vector of the mapping into the vector of that image texture. And we'll just increase the scale. We'll go a value of 3 for each of those. Okay. So now that's looking a lot better already. And you can see more of the distortion going on. But like I said, we're not going to worry about that because this tree will be out of focus. Hopefully. Alright, so now we want to add some more detail to this texture. And you know, I think I might change the scale to 2 for each of those. That'll look a little better. Alright, so now we want to add in some detail. I'm going to go Shader, Mix Shader, and drop in a glossy node. And now I'm going to use a specularity map to determine which parts of this tree are glossy. Now you can, from this image that you've downloaded from CG Textures, you can go ahead and create your own specularity map, or I will make one available in the link of the description of this video on blenderbranch.com. So if you want to go ahead and download the specularity and normal map that I've created for this tutorial, you can download it there. So basically what I'm going to do is just press Shift D, duplicate this image texture, and open the specularity map that I've created, which is this one right here. Open that image and take the color output into the factor of that mix shader, and we want to make sure it shares the same scale as this mapping node. So take the vector output into the vector of the specularity map. So now you can see where the light hits the bark. The glossiness is determined based off of that specularity map. And that just helps us to get way more realistic reflections and glossiness. Now still, it's far too much. Bark isn't actually that glossy. So I'm going to add in a converter color ramp node and sort of squeeze these values together to decrease the amount of glossiness. We can also grab this white value and just turn it down. So wherever you think, that's a pretty good amount. You want it catching some light, but again, trees aren't very glossy, so you don't want it to shimmer and shine. Alright, next thing we're going to do is add in a normal map. So I'm going to duplicate this image texture once again, and we're going to use this purple image right here. That's a normal map that I've created. You can create your own, or you can download mine, like I said, and plug it into the normal on the diffuse, or I'm sorry, we need to go to vector normal map, take the color output of that into the color of the normal map, and you want to make sure underneath the normal map texture you change it to non-color data, and we also want it to share the same scale. And then go ahead and plug this normal output into the normal of the diffuse and of the glossy. So now if we zoom in, you can see we get some bump and yeah, distortion going on there. to make that nice bark pop. And it's far too much, so I'm going to decrease it to about a 0.7. That's pretty good. Now what I'm going to do is sort of smooth this out. Some of this distortion is looking a little weird, so I'm going to go use a smooth brush and just smooth that out like that. Might have gone a little too crazy with our sculpting, because the sculpting will distort your image texture. But again, it's all about how much you're willing to get away with. And now I've hit smooth shading. I might add a subsurf, but I'll wait on that. There you go. That took care of some of the distortion. Our tree's looking a lot better. So now what I'm going to do is sort of scale this down. And I might sort of adjust the scaling a little. And now Control A, apply the rotation and the scale of that tree. Okay, great. Now that we have basically these three assets, we have 2 plants and a tree, we can sort of start putting our scene together in a composition way that will look nice. So I'm going to add in a ground plane. So Shift A, add in plane, and just scale that up till it sort of fills our scene. And I might grab these back 2 vertices, scale them out like that, so that yeah, there we go. That helps with our camera. And now we want to sort of decide which plant we want to be the focal point of our scene. So I think I want this plant right here to sort of be a natural focal point, and this one to be sort of closely behind it, sort of still in focus, but not exactly the main focus of our scene. So we'll sort of rotate these around like so, and I'm going to sort of be on top of each other. So maybe like that. What's helpful in these situations is split your windows. Make one be your 3D view and the other one be sort of where your camera is looking from, so that you can decide how you want to place your image. So here we go. Something like this. I want to kind of low to the ground. Again, this is all composition is all up to you, how you want your image to look. You want, anytime you do a nature scene, you want there to be some natural vignetting and also contrast. So that's why I'm sort of building this plant up on the side, so it's darkening this top corner. And that's what I mean by the natural vignetting. So what we'll probably do is go ahead and duplicate this plant and bring it closer to the camera, like so. Have it dip into the scene and rotate it around maybe. That way some of those leaves are on the other side, creating that natural vignette, like I said, and that's just going to help with your overall composition. So I might scale it up like that and bring it in. There we go. And now, like I said, I mentioned contrast. You want to make sure that you have a good amount of contrast for your focal point of your scene. So what I have here is green plants, and I want a tree to be placed pretty directly behind them, build that separation of our focal point from the rest of our scene. Now I don't want this tree blocking my sunlight, so we'll have to adjust this accordingly. But something right around there, you can scale it up, move it around till we get something interesting. That's pretty good right there, and that really helps with building that natural vignette look. Now currently, if this plant right here, if this is our focal point, we want to make sure that the lighting is set up to make this plant look nice. So if I go Shift Z, you can see it's not really doing that. We don't really have any sort of backlight creating separation on this plant. So we want to go ahead and adjust that. So what I'll do, let's see, I'm going to keep this one my camera view. I'll have that be rendered mode, and I'm going to rotate these lights around up here to sort of be pointed at our object or our focal point. This is where things get kind of hairy, playing with the lighting, making sure it's something realistic. Basically what we're doing, light bounces around in all directions. So if you can think of this first sun as sort of the sun that's illuminating the entire scene, so the sun that's up in the sky, this one is the bigger one. If we check the size, 0.6, That's fairly big for this type of scene. And this sun is sort of the light that's bouncing around from everything else in the woods and creating kind of that separation light, that nice backlight, if you will. So that's why we have this set at a smaller value. I might go even smaller than 0.06. I'll go 0.05. And I might increase the strength also to 4 if we can get away with that. So now that's facing our focal point again. And you can see already the interest is really building with this, making this plant have that nice popping look. You can see the edges you have some translucency and some glossiness going on, and that's really building the whole photorealistic look of our scene. So what I want to do is bring my camera in closer, because currently if we check the camera size up in the camera settings, it's at a focal length of 35. Now, you wouldn't really use that type of lens if you were shooting nature. You'd use more like an 80 or 200 usually to get that nice shallow depth of field. But you'd at least use a 55. So I'm just going to go 55, make things a little easier on us, and sort of reposition my scene. I want to make sure this focal point has some nice separation from the ground, so I don't really want to see its starting point. I might scale this up and rotate it around so it's sort of dipping into the frame, like so. There we go. And now there might be some intersection with this plant, so you can kind of deal with that. There we go. That takes care of that. And let's move it a little more to the side. You want to make sure you're using, the rule of thirds. So if you can picture a grid here, this plant is going to be positioned in the bottom right corner, and we have some natural vignetting going on to sort of build the contrast and interest of our overall scene. Okay, so now what we have to do is, like I said before, create a particle system. So what I'm going to do is just grab these two plants, and I'm going to create a group. So with them selected, press Control and J to create a group. And now I'm going to select this plane, and we want to make sure we have some geometry in our overall plane. So I'm just going to go to top view, press W and subdivide. And let's see, we have fractal enabled. Let's go 0.2 for that. I'm going to increase the number of cuts to 44. So fractal's up way too high for that. Let's turn that down. We just want a slight amount of crinkling. There we go, that's pretty good. And I'll subdivide one more time. Just get some smaller detail. And let's go one more. Now we'll hit smooth shading. So now we have a nice ground plane here to work with. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and add a material to this. So what I'm going to do is change this top one to the node editor. And we'll go Shift Z looking through our camera. And I'll add new material. We'll call this dirt. And let's zoom up here, see what we have. This is just going to be a simple procedural texture. So I'm going to go color, mix RGB, and take that into the diffuse. And we're going to use a texture to be the factor of how these two colors are mixed together. So I'm going to go just a simple noise texture, set the scale to about a 44, take the factor of that into the mix RGB, and find a nice tan dirt color here, and make the same one, basically the same color, just darker. Yep, pretty easy stuff. Nothing fancy, just creating a nice dirt texture. Okay. And the reason I'm not spending a whole lot of time in this is, like I said, this will be mostly out of focus and covered with foliage. We just need something there for our purposes. So let's increase the scale of this distortion. Let's actually go way higher, 144. That way the distortion's a little bit smaller. Okay, now we want to add in some displacement. Let's just adjust this color. If you want to use an image texture for the ground, you certainly can do that. But like I said, it's important for your nature renders. Typically, you don't see a ground a whole lot. If you were to just go out into a forest or something, you'd see mostly foliage. So that's why we're not spending a whole lot of time on the ground. I am going to just add in a texture, Veroni texture. Set the scale really high to about 444. Take the factor of that into the displacement of the material output. So now we have some bumping going on here. That just helps it look a little more realistic, like a ground. And if it's too much for you, you can add in a math node, multiply, and decrease that value a bit. And really that's all we're going to do. You could add glossiness if you wanted to. I might tweak that material later, but for now I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, so now what we have to do is keep building our scene. So we've created this ground plane, and we created a group out of these two plants here. So you guessed it, we're going to create a particle system, new particle system. For now, let's change the number to about 44. We're going to change it from emitter to hair. I'll go ahead and change this top one to a 3D view. There we go. And now we're going to select group for the hair object and select pick random, and underneath group you see we have that group that we created by pressing Control and G. So now the group is these two plants, and they're distributed over our plane. Now the rotation is very much off, so I'm going to go check advanced. Underneath rotation, check that, and we're going to go global Y to get them all sitting up in the proper way. And you can adjust the normal value to sort of adjust the scale of them, and you can adjust the rotation as well, and also you can take this value, or I'm sorry, underneath initial orientation, just increase the random value, so those plants are rotating around in a very random way. Now you have to keep an eye on it. You don't want them dipping into the ground plane too much, so you want them definitely having random rotation and a random size, but you don't want them, sort of intersecting with the ground plane. So there we have a nice amount of rotation and distortion going on here. Just something to add variation to our overall scene. Now, currently, if you look through our camera, you only see a few of those plants. If you look at the ground plane, they're distributed evenly everywhere. So we want to change that. We only want them to be in where we see the camera, because otherwise it's just going to take your rendering down, your rendering time. It's going to take up your rendering time, and you'll have just wasted plants that you don't see. So what I'm going to do with this ground plane selected here, change it from object mode. I'm in the bottom window. We'll go weight paint. And we can sort of basically just paint inside the perimeters of our camera. So your weight paint should be set to draw. You want the weight all the way up and the strength all the way up. And basically I'm just going to sort of paint around the perimeter of our camera. So you can see sort of what I've created up here, that our camera sees everything going out in these angles. So then what we can do is just paint inside the angles. Now you want to make sure that you don't really paint where that tree is. You don't want plants popping up inside the tree. So you sort of paint around there. And you also don't really want plants intersecting with our focal point. So you don't want to paint around the focus of our scene, or paint where the focus of our scene is. And you want to make sure you get this all edge nicely painted in. So basically what we're doing, wherever we have weight paint is going to be wherever we have plants. That's the idea here. Now what we can do is, underneath our particle system settings, go to vertex groups, and underneath density we have a group that we created. Basically if you go to the vertex panel here, this group was created, it was immediately created when we started weight painting. So you can name this group weight, and come to particle settings, just to show you what I mean here. Underneath density, there we have that weight paint. Select that, and now all our particle system is confined to where we have painted. So that helps a lot with our scene, because now these plants come only where we are going to see them in our render. Now what we can do is sort of keep adjusting where they are painted to sort of get them closer to the camera. And now we want to adjust the number. So currently there's only 44. Let's go a value pretty big. Let's go 204 to get some plants nice close up to the camera. And what I'm also going to do is turn the size down a little bit and increase random size. I might turn it back up. There we go. And now that we've done that, I might add even more. So let's go value of 244. That's pretty good. You want to make sure you don't really see that ground plane very much. Okay, now what I'm going to do, I'm going to hide this particle system for now. So I'm just going to check this eyeball right here. And I'm going to go back to edit mode for our ground plane. And I have proportional editing enabled. I'm just going to grab some vertices and just create some variation to our landscape here. So create some mounding in the back. That way it's really unclear where, you know, sort of that plane ends. You don't want it to just look like it just ends right there, you know, at the back. You want it to look like it goes on for quite a while. Now, another thing I want to do is duplicate this tree. So looking through my camera, I'm going to just move this tree around. So I'm going to go Shift D, duplicate it, and rotate it around. Maybe bring it closer to the camera, making sure we have more of that natural vignetting and contrast going on. And also, I'll probably duplicate it one more time. Bring it to near the very back of our scene. So it's going to be pretty far out here, out of focus. Rotate it around. Just to build some more interest to our scene, make it look like we have a fuller overall scene going on here. Alright, so now what we want to do is put a nice background image into our scene and then sort of build the rest of our composition. So I'm going to press Shift A and add in Mesh, import images as planes. If you don't have that add-on, just go to your user preferences and type in planes, and you should see it right there. Check that, import images as planes. So once you have that, you can enable that, and then this add-on works really well. You basically just search for the image that you want to be your background, and you can download this image from blenderbranch.com. It's just this tree background wide, and open that up, and basically what the add-on does, it just projects that image right onto a plane. So you want to make sure we scale this up, having it fill the background of our scene, and you want it to fill the camera. So we'll do like so. We can see what that looks like. Shift Z. There you go. You can see it just helps to extend our scene, so we have a background that'll be nicely blurred out for our final render. Now, one thing I want to do is add a subdivision surface to each of these plants that are going to be seen close up. So I'm going to add subdivision surface, and we'll go render of 2, but a view of just 1 to save our computer from lagging too much. And now you want to be careful, because by putting a subsurf on these 2 plants that are in that group that we're distributing over our particle system, that means now that each plant in the particle system has a subsurf applied to it. So if you don't want that to save on render time, I would suggest just creating a separate group that doesn't have the subsurf on it. For my purposes, I want our plants to look as smooth as possible, so I'm gonna just leave it on there. That way it doesn't look like we're gonna, you know, cut our finger on a plant. Okay, now I'm just gonna continue building my composition just a little bit. I'm gonna duplicate this plant, Shift D, bring it to the back of my scene, just to build some more interest and some more depth. So, you know, maybe somewhere like that. I know it's pretty big, but this part of the scene will be out of focus and sort of in the background, so we can get away with it. And it'll also increase the sort of interest in our lighting when you do this sort of thing, because the shadows bounce around through this light and we get more realistic lighting. I'm also going to duplicate it one more time and bring it to the front, scale it way down, kind of rotate it around, and this will just build more of that natural vignette look, like so. Okay, so once you get your composition how you like it, go ahead and select the plant that is going to be the focus of our scene, and come up to, press N to bring up this sidebar, and we can, underneath item, we can rename this to focus. So now if we select our camera and come up to the camera panel settings, underneath depth of field we have this focus bar, and we can choose focus. So that's what we've renamed this plant to, and now we can increase the size of this radius. I'll go 0.04, and we want to add blades. This will really make the photorealistic look pop, because this means the bokeh will have distinct aperture edges to it. So you can go 6 or 8. Those are both common for cameras. I'm going to go 6 for mine. And let's just do a preview render, Shift Z, see what that looks like. I'll build a render box, so Shift B, build a render box inside that camera. So now we can see what that looks like, and hopefully you'll be able to see that everything outside of this plant is nicely blurred just a little bit. And we're going to increase that blur in when we do some compositing post-processing later on. But for now, we want to get at least the small amount initial blur. And that is very, very important for building the photorealistic look. Now, one last step I want to do. Currently, our sky texture, if we just come to the world panel, it's just rendering as gray. We want to check that, and we're just going to use a simple sky texture. And you can check multiple import settings. I'll give it a strength of about 1.5. It'd be better to use an HDRI, but for the sake of render time, and I know not everyone likes using those, we can get away with the sky texture. And now you see that indirect lighting is just a lot more pleasing, having the skylight in there. All right, so our render is coming together quite nicely. Now what we want to do is separate everything to be on separate render layers. So we're going to use 2 separate render layers for this scene, and this will just help to increase our render time. So basically, you could use 3 if you wanted. I'm just going to use 2 to keep things simple. Let's see, I'll give us some room here. We don't need the split view anymore. Basically what I'm going to do is bring everything onto layer number 2. So to do this, we have to add a render layer. So in our render layer panel settings, let's check plus and name this background. We'll name render layer 1 focus. And you want to make sure underneath render layer 1 that the first layer is checked. Render layer number 2, the second layer is checked. And that'll be these 2 layers right here. So now what I'm going to do is select, let's see, I'll select everything. This ground plane, I'll press M, move it to number 2, move these trees to number 2, all these big plants, and the background, move to number 2, and this plant as well. I'll leave that plant on number 1. We want to make sure there's no intersection going on with this plant. Let's see. Gotta get rid of that. At least not visible to the camera. That's pretty good. Okay. So now these 2 plants on render layer number 1, and if we go to render layer number 2, everything else is there, including the plane with our particle system, which is very important. That'll just help to build the overall speed of our render time. Okay, now, and it'll also give us more control in post-processing when we sort of put these 2 together. And we can hold down Shift to see what they both look like. Now, before we hit render, we want to come up here to the compositor, and here we have our render layer, and it's already set on the first one, which is focus, but we need there to be 2 layers in the compositor or we won't be able to see each layer. So let's go ahead and press Shift D, duplicate that layer, change it from focus to background, and now we can press Control Shift and click on one of these and get a viewer node already plugged in there. And now these layers are present in the compositor, so that way we won't waste time having to re-render everything when we add those in later on. Okay, now all that's left is to adjust our render settings. So let's go to the camera here. I'm going to take the samples up to about 300. I'm going to increase the preview too if you'd like. And underneath these settings here, I'll just go a value of 4 for each of the clamp. And underneath performance, I'm going to go 256 by 256 for the tile size. And I have mine set to 100. Let's just go 50% to make things a little bit quicker. And once all that's done, you want to make sure both these layers are selected, and we are good to go ahead and hit render. Alright, so once that's completed rendering, let's just jump into the compositor, and you can see if we press Control Shift and click each of these render layers, we have our focal point here on the first layer and our background nicely on a second layer. So we can use this to really customize our scene how we would like it. Well, what I'm going to do is press Shift A and put in an alpha over node and drop that in right here between the bottom layer and the viewer node. And I'll take the image output of our first render layer into the bottom of that. And there you go. Now they are composited over top of each other like so. And this enables us to have specific control over each of these. So you can see, hopefully you can see, if I press Alt V to zoom in, you can see the bokeh in that image. It has those edges, and that's great. That's just how a camera would actually do it. And that's because we added in those blades underneath the camera settings. So hopefully you can see how cool that is. Or maybe you don't care. Maybe it's just me gets excited over that. Okay, but the background's out of focus slightly. I want to blur it just a little bit more. So I'm going to go add in a blur node, drop that in, change it to fast Gaussian, and we're just going to go a value of about 2 for each of these and a size of 2 as well. That way that's kind of a softer, cleaner blur, and really helps to make our focal point pop a lot, and that looks great. Now what I'm also going to do is darken the background. So I'm going to add in a color balance node and plug that in like so, and just boost the darks like this, and that brings some more contrast from our foreground to our background, and that's looking very nice. And I might boost the lights ever so slightly and just kind of take them to that yellow side just to get some brightness in there like so. Okay, great. Now what we can do is I'm going to add in another color balance node to our first render layer and sort of brighten this up. I'm going to brighten the midtones of this ever so slightly, and then also take the contrast down a little bit to provide even more separation like that. Okay, so that's great. Those are looking great, and you can do more if you want to really go crazy with the blur. You can do that, and that'll just really make this image pop even more. But because we went through all the time of modeling each of those background elements, I'm going to leave it at about 2, just because I like being able to see the rest of the scene and the complexity of it. Okay, so now what we want to do, you could call that good and just say, yep, I like it, that's finished, and you could maybe add a few more nodes. For instance, you could go hue saturation for the background and desaturate this a little bit, and that would really help the focal point to sort of pop a little bit more. But what I'm going to do actually is save this image out as a final render and then take it into Photoshop. Alrighty, so here I have my image inside of Photoshop, and all these steps you could certainly do inside of GIMP if you don't have Photoshop or any other post-processing software. So basically, I'm going to download an image. This is just a simple dust image that you can download from blenderbranch.com. I'll make the link for that available in the description. And it's just this image right here of dust particles. So I've placed it directly over top of my render layer here. And with the dust layer selected, let's just change the blend value to screen. You can see the effect that has. We get some nice coloring going on. It really sort of brings out the sunlight and just gives that subtle realistic flare of those dust particles floating around in the air. Now you want to make sure anytime you do this, you sort of match the angle of the sun. So what I'm going to do is kind of rotate this image, bring it over a little more like so, and we can just adjust the scaling like that to fit our needs. Alright, now I'm going to change the opacity. We don't want it at 100%, that's a little too strong. So we'll just take it down. This is all really to taste. If you like sort of the clean look, you'll want to just not have too much of this. And really all of this is definitely optional, but it does help to just sell that realistic nature render when you add these little steps. Okay, so that's good for our purposes. Now another step I'm going to do is grab this layer right here, our plant layer, and I'm going to go ahead and duplicate it. And I'll set the top one to blur. Just go Gaussian blur. We'll do a really small amount. Again, all these options you can do in GIMP if you don't have Photoshop. And now I'm just going to set that layer to overlay. And basically you can see that really boosts the contrast of our overall scene. It's a little too much for me, so I'm going to turn this opacity layer down. I just want a little bit of it to sort of get that soft glow and boost the contrast. So there we go. I'm pretty happy with that result right there. Now what I'm also going to do is desaturate the entire scene just a little bit. So I'm going to turn the saturation down just because I like more of the warm colors and less prominent um, saturation. And we might also boost the contrast. Now, one final step you want to do is add a vignette. So we created some natural vignetting in our scene. We want to make sure we have an additional one to sort of emphasize that. So the way we do this is just create a black layer by using the paint bucket. And I'm just going to grab an eraser tool, set the size a little bit bigger, and the opacity at 100, and just sort of erase right here in the center where our focal point is here, just so the edges are still black, especially the corners. And you can create whatever type of vignette you'd like. Alrighty, and now I'm just gonna decrease the opacity of that. Just subtle, you don't want the vignette to be too obvious. Right about there is good. So you can see the amount of post-processing you do is really completely up to you to create your final render. You can certainly play with each of these values and sort of edit them to taste. But that's it for me. That's how to create a photorealistic nature image, and this is an excellent thing to have for your portfolio. It'll really help you stand out if you have something that showcases your lighting abilities and also your composition. So thank you for watching. I hope it was useful and hope you can use it to create some awesome photorealistic nature scenes. I will talk to you in the next Blender Branch tutorial. Thanks for watching.